Welcome to Real Estate U with Lettiann.
Here we are. I am with the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Bill Marsee. So for those of you in the Kansas City metropolitan area who are homeowners, you likely know or have heard of Glenn Marsee and Son. So we are with Bill Marsee today, the iconic, great reputation foundation repair specialist. So Bill, thank you so much for being here.
Sure.
Yeah, good. So how did your family business start? And when did it start?
Well, it started in 1910 with my grandfather, who I'm named after. His name was Bill. And up through the 20s and 30s, they primarily moved houses and then built stone foundations under them. Most foundations back in that period were stone. And we've always been partial to stone foundations.
Oh, well, tell me, what do you mean they moved houses? Tell me about that. Like picking them up off the...
Yeah.
Wow.
Jacking them up and and putting them on cribbing, and then moving them, from one location to another, and then building stone foundations under them at that time.
So you said you were partial to stone. I mean, your grandpa was partial to stone foundations. How come?
That's about all they had back then.
Okay.
There were some real old concrete foundations dating back into the early 1900s, and a few block, but most of the houses back then had stone foundations. And stone typically are 18 inches wide, and they tend to withstand the hydrostatic pressure better over time than a lot better than block, and in a lot of cases better than the concrete.
Wow. I mean, that's news to me. I wouldn't think that a stone foundation would be the best to hold up. Like, what do you put in between the stone to help with the support?
Well, the width, 18 inches wide. Most
Okay.
concrete foundations, which is about all they've built since the early 50s here, was mostly 8-inch concrete foundations. And stone are 18 inches wide, so they're just, of course, they're not reinforced, but because of the width and the weight of them, they tend to withstand the hydrostatic pressure over time better than concrete, and a lot better than the block.
But does water...
Now, most stone foundations don't have concrete footings under them, although some of the larger, more expensive homes with stone foundations have footings, but most of the normal size houses, they're stone foundations with no concrete footings under them. But still, over time, they just tend to hold up better than anything else.
So your grandfather, did he do a lot of work in and around the Plaza area and maybe the Mission Hills area and the Northeast and those types of foundations?
Yes, well, they kind of worked all over. Dad said they're back, I think in the 30s, they did some work. They did some stone retaining walls, I think, up at Lake Quivira, some of which I think are still up there. There's a lot of stone retaining walls and stone foundations up there on the older houses.
Do you ever get calls and go, oh, my goodness, my grandfather put this foundation in? You ever gone to a house and say, I think my dad was here? Or
my dad's been gone since 1993. He passed away in 93. And we get calls on some of the houses that Dad worked on back in the 50s and 60s. Of course, I've been working full-time since 1964.
And you have a great reputation. So I want to say Bill is talking about his dad. So the company's name is Glenn Marsee and Son, and Glenn, double N, Glenn, as you'll see on the screen here. That's the name of the company, although I sometimes slip and go, hi, Vicki, is Glenn available? But I really mean you. So tell us, there's so many things that homeowners can do that maybe they're not aware of to prevent some foundation situations. What are some of the things homeowners can do? Tell us, Bill.
Well, I guess the very first thing is clean the gutters more than once or twice a year. So many of the houses I look at after we have these heavy rains and people get water in, sometimes for the first time, That's a lot of times I go out and the gutters are clogged up and running over, or the downspout extensions are not on, or the downspouts aren't extended out far enough. And then the other thing is a lot of people let the dirt around the foundation get too low, the grade, or the perimeter grade get too low, and they don't regrade, at times when they need to. Of course, a lot of the older houses, the majority of the older houses built back from the 50s on up into the 90s or so, so many of those houses are setting too low in the ground to get really proper drainage away from the foundations. A lot of the houses we work on built in the 50s and 60s, the top of the foundations are sometimes just a few inches or 6 inches or so above the ground level.
And that's not enough.
And that's not conducive for good, proper drainage, away from the foundation. Most engineers like to see at least a 1 inch per foot drop away from the foundation out 5 to 6 feet. So if you're bringing the dirt out 5 or 6 feet, it should be at least 5 or 6 inches higher at the foundation if possible, and still have at least 4 to 6 inches of clearance between the siding or brick and the ground level. But most of the older houses we work on, you really can't do that without digging swales out so far.
So I'm going to rewatch this episode, and we're not even done yet because I want to take notes. I mean, this is some incredible stuff that people just either aren't aware of until it's too late. The only advice when people ask me if I have foundation advice, I say if you don't have a sprinkler system, water your foundation. Is that a good thing?
That's critical, especially here as dry as we get at times in the summers.
And
you
why
don't
is
have
that?
to have a sprinkling system. I don't have one, but soaker hoses laid around the foundation and used at least several times a week. I water mine in dry weather for sometimes 2 or 3 hours at a time, 3 or 4 days a week.
Wow, every week in
And
dry
soaker
time.
hoses laid out anywhere from a foot to a foot and a half or 2 feet out. And in some cases, it's a good idea to put double soaker hoses out so you can waters up to the foundation and then out further.
So tell everyone why it's important or almost imperative to water your foundation, especially in dry periods, even in the winter, right? In dry times? Is that?
Well, you can water in the winter if it's above freezing.
That's what
but
I mean.
Most
above.
sprinkling systems here are shut down in the winter. So you can't really water in the winter unless you supplement with soaker hoses if you want to water. But normally it does get drier in the winter. Not as dry as it does through the summer, but unless we get a lot of snow, a lot of people have problems in the winter if we haven't had much snow moisture through the winter.
And the why behind the watering is the drier it gets, the dirt pulls away. But
Well,
I'm not the expert.
Yeah, this clay soil tends to shrink excessively when it dries out.
Creating a gap around the foundation.
Yeah, and then, in the opposite, when it gets, wet, it expands. Mm-hmm. And that's why there's so many foundation issues. Of course, that's why the grade is so important to run try to get the water to drain away, but it's equally as important in dry weather to water around the foundation. Most engineers recommend usually up to 2 inches per week around the foundation.
So if someone were curious if their foundation needed, the dirt, the grade around their home needed regraded, who might they call to just check the grade? Would they call you? Or would they call?
We do quite a bit of that with our other work. A lot of times, if they just need dirt, sometimes we're pretty, too busy during the summer months. A lot of times, just to do grading, we're so busy generally with structural issues, and we do a lot of epoxy injection, on concrete foundations. So, but we do quite a bit of grading in conjunction a lot of times with our other work. But a lot of landscape companies do the grading also.
But they may not know the exact, all the measurements and things that you had just mentioned about, so many inches per feet and all of that.
Okay. Well, I'm sure some of them do, and maybe some of them don't.
Finished basements. So oftentimes I would think that, regular, we see water in our unfinished part of our basement. But then there's times when you have a finished basement and people are starting to notice maybe the carpet's wet or the floor is moving or what's happening there? What do you see there?
Yeah, we get a lot of calls after these heavy rains from people with finished basements. And that's the first thing I ask, or my wife, Vicki, asks when she takes the calls typically, but is the basement finished or unfinished? Of course, if it's unfinished, it's pretty obvious how the water's coming in. It's either coming through cracks and running down the wall onto the floor, or it's coming underneath the wall, and these concrete foundations particularly, underneath the wall and up between the wall and the floor, and sometimes up through the floor cracks. But in a finished area, you can't tell the difference. And sometimes people will say, well, we pulled the carpet back and it's on the floor. But unless you can see the wall and see if it's actually running down the wall onto the floor, you really can't say for sure. You know, if it's leaking through cracks, they can be epoxy injected. But if it's coming underneath and up, the next question is, do you have a sump pump? And then the next question after that, if you have a sump pump, is, well, how close is that sump pump to where the water's coming in? If it's coming between the wall and the floor. Usually it's, more often than not, it's on the opposite side of the basement. So in some cases that requires a second sump pump. A lot of houses we work on and that we've worked on over the years we've had to put a second and sometimes a third sump pump in, especially on bigger basements where they have a lot of water coming around the perimeter.
When a builder installs a sump pump, how does he or she know where the most appropriate place to put it would be? And you're laughing. That must be you must be like, why did that builder put that sump pump there?
We wonder the same thing sometimes on some of these older houses and some of the newer ones once in a while as to why they put the sump pump where they did. But on the older homes built back from the late 40s on up into the mid to late 70s, particularly, well, all over the Kansas City area, but particularly in the Johnson County area, it was legal in that period of time to connect the foundation drain systems into the sanitary sewer system.
Is that a no-no?
And that, after they got so many houses built and dumping groundwater into the sanitary sewer system, they had a lot of problems with the sanitary sewers getting overloaded and causing backups into basements. So over the years, Johnson County Wastewater has had a program ongoing, for a long time, and I think still to this day, where they will come in and inspect the house, and if the houses are still connecting their drain systems into the sanitary system, they put sump pumps in and pay for it. I think that's still ongoing at this point. Mm-hmm. They've done a lot of those over the years, but there's still a lot of houses that are still connected into the sanitary sewer system with their drain systems. But that became illegal in the late 70s, and from that point on, they've been required to put sump pumps in and then pump the water out on the ground and not into the sanitary sewer system.
So if you like what you're seeing here, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Lettiann Associates Real Estate Services. And if you're watching on Facebook, please like what you're seeing and say hi to Bill. And he's a wealth of information. Like I said, he's an icon here and his family in the Kansas City metropolitan area as the foundation specialist. And I'm saying that because I've used Glenn Marsee and Son. I've met Bill probably 20 years ago. And what I love about what Bill does, and I'll tell you, Bill, is you're always an honest engine. I encourage, as a realtor, I encourage people to get 2 to 3 bids from contractors for whatever they're having done. And I do the same thing. And on a house 15 years ago in Redbridge, I had gotten 3 bids for my home, and the first 2 were French drain systems, $8,000 and $10,000. And here comes Bill, and he said, I need to, I don't know what it's called, Bill, but under the fireplace in the basement and the unfinished part, you just cut out the concrete, you put in some stone, and you laid stone around the clay tile of the house. It wasn't because it was already there, so you allowed a place for the water to go, and it was a fourth of the cost of what they wanted to sell me. And I really felt like the first 2 people really didn't even understand what the problem was. They just wanted to put in a $10,000 system that really I didn't need. And, after your folks left that house and finished the work, we had no more water in that unfinished part. So anyway, I always recommend you because you're honest and you know what you're talking about. You have decades of experience. Also, what was I going to ask you? Sorry. Producer just gave me the 5-minute warning and threw me for a loop. What's the craziest thing you've seen, Bill? With a foundation? Any dead bodies? Anything crazy?
Oh, well, as far as foundations go, we've done a lot of work over the years, probably I would think more than anybody other company in Prairie Village with the houses with the block foundations that J.C. Nichols built there right after World War II. And those block foundations, of course, none of those were reinforced at all. And they were really susceptible to the hydrostatic pressure, causing the walls to push in and buckle. And on a couple of jobs that we couldn't get to in both those cases soon enough, the front walls collapsed and the front porches fell on the basement floor before we could get to it, to set jacks under it. Fortunately, the house, you can lose part of a wall under a house like that, and it really doesn't affect the upstairs that much. If it's just part of a wall or even a half of a wall or more. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when we've removed just parts of some of these block walls in Prairie Village, sometimes we don't even have to set a jack. But if you get over about 20, 25 feet, normally it's a good idea to shore it with jacks. We still use the same jacks that they used to use move houses with back in the 20s and 30s, the old screw-type jacks.
Pole, yeah, I've seen those, with the pole. Yeah. I have a few questions. So is it true that if you have a walkout basement, is it a myth or is it true that one wouldn't need a sump pump in a walkout basement?
Well, normally they don't put sump pumps in walkouts.
Because of the grade, you're already like this.
Yeah, in most cases, those have the drain systems on the outside. And I'm talking about the little bit newer houses.
Okay.
For some reason, when they switched from blocks and stone in the late 40s and very early around 1950, 51, from about 51 or so, from that point on, all the foundations here, 99% are poured concrete. And for some reason, they switched to the drain systems from the outside, which most all the block foundations, the old clay tile drain systems are on the outside perimeter. And then when they switched to the concrete, on the inside. A drain system is more effective if it's on the outside to begin with. That's where the water pressure is building up. So over the years, we've had to replace a lot of those clay tile systems. We've always replaced the system on the outside if we're replacing a block wall. Mm-hmm. But we replace it with the 4-inch perforated plastic pipe, which they finally started using in the 70s. It's much more effective at water getting into the system. The old clay tile systems, those individual tiles are 12 inches long, 4 inches in diameter. They're not perforated. And it's hard for the water to get into the system, whether it's on the inside or the outside. It can only seep in every joint every 12 inches. So we have to improve those existing systems, primarily on the inside, on the older concrete foundations. A lot of times where you're getting water bleeding in between the wall and the floor, you already have a drain system under most of those. It's just not as efficient as it can be. And that's why I think that's probably what we did on that house for you were talking about, where we had to open part of the floor up. And we still do a lot of that, where we replace sections of the old clay tile that's not perforated with the 4-inch perforated plastic pipe, and it makes it much more efficient. And then generally you're not getting the bleed out between the wall and the floor, because it's easier for the water to get into the system once it gets underneath the floor.
There's so much to know, and I hope Glenn Marsee and Son continues on and on. My last question, I wish we had more time, but my last question is, when you get a call and you know it's in a certain area of town, when do you get excited and your heart's like, oh, I can't wait to see that basement? Or what excites you the most, because you've been doing this for so long? Do you prefer going to the older homes and really trying to doctor what's happening? Or do you like the advice you give to homeowners that are generally clueless, or what?
Well, a lot of times I know when we get calls from certain parts of town, basically what the problem is. In a lot of cases,
you already know before you go.
Yeah, we've been around so long, and of course, in the older part of Prairie Village, of course, most of those are block foundation houses, And a lot of those, of course, they're tearing down a lot of those now and building, bigger houses, much larger houses with, of course, with concrete.
But they're not
foundation.
they're not building on existing, right? They're taking the whole foundation out and pouring new.
A number of them we've worked on they're much bigger houses now.
Okay, I see. And when I say homeowners clueless, I'm simply saying that often people are, if it's not broke, why look into it or fix it until there's a problem, right? But who would have thought there's foundation preventative maintenance, right? And the watering, you just said 2 to 3 hours per week. And then you said, clean out your gutters 2 to 3 times a season. Is that right?
Well, at least. Depends on how many trees you have around.
So all very important. And then downspout, the extenders on the downspouts, get the water away from the house. But then you need to water it when it's dry. So
exactly.
Yep, got to keep your eye on it. So Bill, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time today. I know Kansas City appreciates you, and I do as well. So thank you all for watching, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Real Estate U with Lettiann.